Welcome to my in-progress review of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. The goal with this review is really just to capture my thoughts on the game after 6 or 7 hours playing through it, to see how that evolves over time. I am playing the early release version of the game, which gives you early access. I saw that it was on Green Man Gaming for around the same price as the base game on Steam, so I went ahead and got that. But as a general rule, I wouldn't recommend anyone pre-order this, just wait until more reviews come out. Before we get started, I'm sure you've seen the technical issues the game has had its first day of early access, with people unable to play while servers were down for different reasons. Luckily, the game wasn't even available in my region at that time, so I haven't had that issue. I haven't had any other server issues since I started playing, since the US launch time. The other technical issues I've had are one hard crash during a cutscene, and in the open world, my frame rate can drop by 10 or so after a couple of hours playing. Might be a memory leak issue, not sure about that. That, and the game doesn't seem to be using a whole lot of my GPU, which either means I'm CPU throttled or the game isn't very well optimized. I'll leave my specs in the description so you can judge for yourself. Other than that, the game runs pretty well, and in interior spaces I get over 100 frames. In the open world, usually I'm hitting around 60. Moving on, I want to talk about some things that I like about the game so far. To start out with, I like the story. I've played the Arkham games a lot in the past, but I always saw this as its own separate thing. I didn't actually know it was a sequel, direct sequel, until I started playing, so I don't mind the mess around with the existing characters from the Arkham universe, and I think the premise of taking back Metropolis and killing the Justice League is interesting at least. I like the dynamics between the characters, although it feels pretty much like an edgier Guardians of the Galaxy, so if you're tired of that kind of humor, you might roll your eyes at it a lot here. My expectations for the story and dialogue were honestly pretty low. I assumed it would be cringy, try-hard humor, kind of like the newest Saints Row game, but early on I was surprised at some of the jokes and I laughed more than a couple of times. I also like combat for the most part. Looking at footage of it is pretty nauseating, especially with the UI. I'll talk more about that later, but once you've been playing for a while and get used to how the combat flows, it's not quite as hectic. It's fast-paced, it's switchy, and at the difficulty I'm playing at, which is the hardest one you can select at the beginning, you really have to use the traversal and shield harvesting mechanics to keep moving and stay alive. It's pretty much the opposite of Gotham Knights. Some missions have special modifiers like only being able to do damage with grenades, only doing damage with shield harvests, which is a mechanic where you have to shoot an enemy certain ways to get them into a sort of execute state. And my favorite is a mode where you have to kill a certain kind of fast-moving enemy in order to get a buff that lets you do damage to other enemies. These modifiers add difficulty and force you out of your comfort zone to try new things. I'm not sure how I'll feel about the combat once I've played for longer, but right now I'm having a pretty good time with it. Some miscellaneous things I like are the Riddler challenges. The actual riddles that lead to trophies, kind of like in the Arkham games, are here, but those are ridiculously easy, almost kind of laughable. But then there are traversal challenges, more like in the newer Spider-Man games, where you basically have to do an obstacle course with whatever character you pick in a set amount of time, and then you get a sort of star rating based off of that. Another thing I like is that the challenges in the game typically focus on what works in combat and making things fast-paced. I went back and played some Diablo 4 recently, and I was reminded about how in that game a lot of the challenge comes from random stuff trying to make you worse at combat, usually by slowing you down, CCing you, getting frozen, or getting off-screened, and you basically have to brute force through it. In this game, it seems to focus more on the things that work about combat, forcing you to use more advanced mechanics to beat challenges. The last thing I'll talk about is the psyched up system. Basically, certain missions will give more rewards if you do them with a certain character, which encourages you to swap between them. I started off not really liking Harley Quinn's movement set, and it's still my least favorite, but I wasn't really using her until she was the one psyched up for a mission, so I played as her for a bit and gave it a shot. And at the end, I ended up liking her more than I did before. Moving on to some things I didn't like. First off, the UI. It looks like one of those challenges where someone progressively adds UI elements to their stream over time until they can't see anything. Shout out Doug. There have been a couple of times where I seriously just can't find the objective I'm supposed to be at because it's hidden behind a bunch of other elements. I think a big reason for this is actually the environment. Enemies can be in a 360-degree radius around you and at 100 different elevations. So there's all these markers trying to point you at them, but they're everywhere. Another thing I don't love is the crafting system. First off, I'm pretty sure you have to go back to your main base to do it, whereas everything else is done in your character menu. Secondly, my eyes pretty much glaze over when I see that the crafting cost for one thing is 3 random primary color materials that I guess I've picked up during missions, and comparing this new thing to my previous thing is just a bunch of stat increases. So far that's a pretty weak point for me, and I'm not really interested in it. Luckily, the guns differentiate themselves a bit in that they have different manufacturers, which change things like the fire mode, how the reload system works, and change the way you play it a little bit. Talents are another thing I think could be improved. The talent tree does something that I'm not a huge fan of, which basically is it focuses on percentage increases. Mostly they're based around combos, which I actually like the combo system. Basically, if you get a combo streak high enough by hitting shots and doing traversal without being interrupted, you build up a combo meter. But most of the talents I've seen just modify what happens once you're in that sort of high combo flow state, and they're pretty passive versus giving you new and different abilities in combat. I think it would be nice if they give you different ways to traverse or new attacks instead. One other thing I didn't like are the key bindings. I'm playing on mouse and keyboard, and it is weird. The game wants you to use Control and Alt a lot while you're moving around really fast, which is hard to get used to. I'd recommend switching some of those keys around to more accessible ones, like I put my dodge button on one of my extra mouse buttons. That pretty much covers it for my early thoughts on the game so far. I'm enjoying playing through the main story and doing the side missions. I've got some gripes with it for sure, and it remains to be seen whether it's worth the full $70, but overall I'm enjoying it. We'll see how that evolves over the next however long it takes to get to endgame. Thanks for watching. If you want to see me stream this over the next couple of days, I'll be live on this channel playing on and off. Alright, see you later.